every now and then the lectionary will skip verses. They skip verses today. They skip verses 2 through 6 in this story in the New Testament. And I think I know why they skip those verses, because they tell about a healing on the Sabbath. And if you were here last week, you may remember that the story was about a bent-over woman being healed on the Sabbath. I guess they figured you must have gotten it then. You don't need to hear the story one more time. I think that story is a significant part of this story of the party. So I want to just read those verses quickly for you. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. There in front of him was a man suffering from dropsy. Dropsy is just an old word for edema. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in the law, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. So taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him on his way. And then he asked them, "If one of you has a son or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, would you not immediately pull him out?" And they had nothing to say. When's the last time you were invited to a dinner party? Do people even give dinner parties anymore? I don't know. I haven't received an invitation to a dinner party in a long time. Maybe it is that people are giving dinner parties and I'm just not on the list. That could be. I was on the list once, some years ago. A creamy envelope came in the mail, and inside was a very expensive weight card, and it was announcing a dinner party in honor of George. It was his 40th birthday, and George was an elder in my church. So I went. The hostess pulled out all the stops for her party. The flowers were amazing on the table and at strategic places in the house. The decorations. The table was a masterpiece of tablecloth and silver and china and linen napkins. Everything just so. The yard was carefully trimmed. The house was spotless. And there was a slight hint of fresh paint that let you know that she had done a little bit of fixing up in preparation for the party. And then the guests arrived. It was a surprise party, so we all gathered and waited for George, the over-the-hill 40-year-old. I think about that now, and that's funny. 40 over the hill? No, not so much. It was a surprise party. It turns out it was a surprise in more ways than one. The first surprise was when George got there. And everybody came out and went, "Surprise!" You've been to those parties. Well, George was surprised, or at least he acted surprised. You don't want to answer a surprise party by going, "Oh, I already knew about it." No, you have to play along. Surprise! George was surprised. After that, the drink flowed freely. That's not a surprise. And then came the dinner. At the end of the meal was a bigger surprise. As the meal wound down and plates were being cleared for dessert, you could hear a rumbling off in the darkness, and out into the room rolled a larger-than-life birthday cake made out of plywood and covered with crepe paper. And it was pushed by some of George's buddies, some of them old fraternity buddies. That'll give you a clue. And they were smiling like they had swallowed a canary. They pushed the cake out there in the middle of the room. Surprise! Because when the lid of the cake flipped back, a stripper stepped out. Now, the hostess's face turned first red, then, as the dance went on, opened wide with horror, and then she was furious. The dance went on way past when it was funny, and she was thinking to herself, "This is how I am going to be remembered, after all the work I have done, the party where the stripper came out. She was mad. Now the stripper table danced right in front of George, whirling and twirling and jiggling. I think she was jiggling. I closed my eyes. Well, maybe I risked one of them. I don't know. Everybody was watching George, and they were watching the hostess, and they were watching the stripper until it became so embarrassing you couldn't watch. And then my back felt like people were watching me, and some of them were. You know why. What's the preacher going to do when faced with a birthday party stripper in her mostly birthday party suit? That's one of the occupational hazards. The people from my church who were there, they were on their best behavior, let me tell you. And here's why. Because they knew me well enough to know that this was very likely going to end up in a sermon. And it did, and it has again. Have you ever been invited to a dinner party? You never know what's going to happen at a party. Jesus, you know, loved a good party. You cannot read the Gospels without knowing that Jesus loved to party. He's always at a party. So much so, do you realize that people criticized him and called him a party animal? They said he is a drunkard and he is a glutton. He loved parties. Why, it was one of the reasons they gave for killing Jesus, is that he loved to party too much with the wrong kind of people, you see. In our gospel story, Jesus is at a party. It's a party with the right kind of people. A Pharisee, a hoodoo, a prominent religious leader has thrown a party. It's a Friday night party. If you're scratching your head thinking, wait a minute now, weren't the Pharisees enemies of Jesus? Didn't they hate Jesus? And if so, what in the world is he doing at the party? Well, you'd be right, or mostly right. Some of the Pharisees believed in Jesus, you remember? Some of them very secretly. Nicodemus was a Pharisee who came to Jesus when at night, hiding. And then there was Joseph of Arimathea. When they took Jesus' body down from the cross, Joseph said, "Use my tomb." He was a Pharisee. But most of them loathed Jesus. At this dinner, the Pharisee and his buddies are not friendly. If you note carefully in this story, Jesus has a shadow on his face. It's the shadow of the cross. It's very near. He has that on his face. But he still goes to the enemy's party. Do you wonder why? I don't know. What do you think? I think it's because he doesn't give up easy. Jesus doesn't give up easy on anybody. Even people who hate him. Maybe this time Jesus reasons they will listen. Maybe this time they'll finally see and they'll turn and be saved while there is time. Jesus doesn't give up easy. He does not give up easy on you or on me or anybody. And neither should we. Jesus keeps trying to the end. So should we if we follow him. Those who invite Jesus to this Friday night party, did you see where Luke says they are watching him carefully? They weren't watching to see if he was happily surprised. No. They were watching for him to mess up. Have you ever had anybody watching to see if you will mess up? They're waiting for you to mess up so they can lower the boom on you. I had a few teachers like that. Some parents are like that. Some so-called good Christians are like that. They've got their rule book out, and they're watching you to see if you mess up so they can lower the boom. Let me tell you, if you haven't ever been watched that way, it's terrible. It puts all kinds of pressure on you. When I was a sales rep for Pfizer, one of my colleagues came to me one day with a crestfallen face. And he said to me, secretive-like, because he didn't want anybody to hear, "They've put me on the plan." That's all he said. "They've put me on the plan." That's what Pfizer called it. Do you know why they put him on the plan? He was not measuring up to expectations. So they said to him, "You sign right here. This document says that on this date, we put you on the plan. We're giving you notice." On the plan was a nice way to say what? We're watching you very carefully to see if you mess up. Being on the plan meant that his manager came frequently to ride in the car with him and to go into his sales calls standing in the shadows like that woman across the table, rolling his eyes and grimacing his mouth. Being on the plan meant that at the end of the day, when reps had all this paperwork to do, he had even more because he was on the plan. Why, being on the plan meant when he got to the end of the day, his voicemail box was full of message marked urgent. It's terrible to be on the plan. Before long, he'd had enough of the plan and he quit, which is exactly what they wanted him to do. You understand that? Put pressure on him. They wanted him to quit. They thought, if we make it hard enough on him, he's going to quit. And that's a whole lot neater than us having to fire him. So you understand, the Pharisees are watching Jesus closely. Why? They're trying to put him on the plan. To put pressure on him, the pressure that comes from being so closely watched. They wanted Jesus to quit. They'd had enough of Jesus. They had already decided he has to go somehow. They wanted Jesus to give up. They decided it would be a lot easier if he would go on his own rather than for them to have to quit him, which they ended up doing. He's on the plan. When I read this story, I wonder, do you, if the man who had a bad case of edema, whose legs and ankles were swollen grotesquely, whose hands were swollen, who had to sleep in the chair at night because he could not lie down and breathe, the terror of edema, I wonder if his presence there was an intended surprise, that he was a plant. You see? They can do this if you're on the plan. They got together and said, what if we put this man here? What will Jesus do? Well, they knew what he was going to do. It was Friday night, and that's the Sabbath. And it was against the law to heal on the Sabbath. They reasoned to themselves, if we put this man there, he will not be able to resist breaking the law. Now, as hard as it is for us to understand in our Sabbath-less world, breaking the Sabbath law was enough for them to quit Jesus. So he looked at that swollen man and then at the watchers. Jesus was not done. And still looking at the man, Jesus raised a question. Legal? Legal to heal on the Sabbath? He said, still looking at the man. Not a one of them said a word, Luke says. And so Jesus, for whom people were always more important than rules, reached out and took hold of this man with his hands. And it was like his hands were some kind of miracle Lasix. because immediately this suffering man stood svelte in front of him. Now, just like that, the edema was gone, and while he whirls and twirls and jiggles for joy in front of all of them, and some of them look disgusted, the grim-faced watchers pull out their little black plan books and make note of the exact day and hour when Jesus failed yet again. You see, he's on the plan. But this dinner party, like the one I attended, has a surprise ending. Did you hear it? We find out that Jesus is not only being watched, he's also watching. Jesus has been watching. Why, he's noticed how these people at the entrapment party are siding themselves up towards the head table, wanting to be seen with the who's who's, wanting to be noteworthy along with the other noteworthy people. Jesus has watched their behavior. And so, Jesus, who has their attention by his in-your-face healing, suddenly turns Emily Post or Martha Stewart. He offers a helpful word of dinner party advice. Did you hear it? Listen, he says, if you get invited to a party, for heaven's sake, don't embarrass yourself by trying to take a place up close to the honored guests. Someone will come along and tap you on the shoulder and say, "Excuse me, sir. Excuse me. You're not supposed to be sitting here. You're supposed to be at table 19, way back there in the back, with the old maid great aunt and the other person who was invited to this party, who they didn't really want to invite, but they had to invite him. Table 19 back there, sir, in front of everybody. You'll be humiliated," Jesus said. It happens. Oh, it happened to Linda Brown. It happened to Linda. Oh, Linda's not a social climber, you know that. She was an innocent party. Linda got seated by a nervous usher at a wedding in the place where the mother of the bride was supposed to go. And she got planted there, and almost immediately from behind her they whispered, "You're not supposed to be there." And Linda whispered back, "I know I'm not supposed to be there. What should I do?" And the procession is going on, and up the aisle comes the now chastised, no doubt by the director, chagrined usher, who comes up and taps her on the shoulder and makes her stand up and face everybody who has witnessed and go back, behind Albert. She finally gets seated. Linda was mortified. Jesus said, "Look, it's best to take a seat at table 19, and if you're lucky, somebody might come back there and say, 'Well, what are you doing back here? Why are you here? Come on, there's a place up here for you. Come on.' And in front of everybody, you'll be moving up the aisle, and they'll go, 'Woo, we wonder who that was.'" You see, Jesus' dinner party advice. Oh, he's got more, you know, because he was a party goer. And what's more, do you realize that Jesus is fond of saying the kingdom of God is itself like a great dinner party? Not surprising. What advice would Jesus give you as we close? Besides taking the low seat at a party, I think he'd tell you to make sure you're on time. Make sure you're on time. Now, I know on time in party etiquette means 15 minutes late, doesn't it? It really does. You're not supposed to show up on time, and certainly not ahead of time. The hostess needs 15 minutes to make last-minute touches. 15 minutes is about right. Be late. But Jesus would say to you, listen, don't be late. Don't miss this party. For heaven's sakes, don't think, I'll get to that party sometime after I've run all my errands and gotten everything done I need to do. Because you may discover it's like walking up to a gate at the airport and you're supposed to fly, and the door is closed. And if you've ever done that, you know no amount of begging and pleading will get them to open that door. Jesus told a story about that once. If you don't believe it, ask the 5 maidens who were out searching for oil and were late for the party. Jesus said the door was shut forever. So he'd say, be on time. I think Jesus would say, listen, bring unannounced guests to the party. The more the merrier. And, in fact, make sure you bring your children. Now, that's different. Miss Manners says if your name's on the invitation, that's you. It's not you plus 1 or plus 2. And for heaven's sake, she says, don't drag your children along. But Jesus would say, the more the merrier. Invite everybody. And if everybody won't come, invite the poor and the lame and the blind. And if they won't come, you go to the ends of the earth to find somebody who will come with you to the party. And make sure you bring your children. In fact, if you're a parent, that's your number 1 job, Jesus would say. Bring your children to the party. And if you've ever said yes when a baby was baptized, yes, we'll support them, we'll care for them, it's on you. Bring your children to the party. Because Jesus says if you want to know how to behave at a party, just watch the children. That's what he says. And then lastly, I think Jesus would say, come without a gift. Oh, I know. Miss Manners says if you want to be invited back, you come with a hostess gift. She suggests a bottle of wine. Bring some wine to the hostess. Well, let me tell you, you don't need to bring wine to the party Jesus hosts, because he's pretty good at wine. If you don't believe that, you ask the chief steward at the wedding at Cana, where Jesus turned 120 gallons of water into Chateau Lafite. Remember? Because he loved to party. So no wine, no gift, but by all means, you. What is it the old hymn says? Nothing in my hands I bring, simply to thy cross I cling. You're invited. There's a party. For heaven's sake, don't miss it. In the name of the Father, and Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.